This is my true story. I worked my whole life for my family, gave them food, a home, and every comfort I could. But when I lost my job and money got tight, they started laughing at me. They called me a failure, a man who wasted his years. Each word hurt more than the last, but I stayed quiet. I didn't fight back. I just waited. Because life has its own way of speaking for you. One day, they would see my name on TV, and everything would change. Before that, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. Every morning started the same way. I woke up early, made breakfast, and tried to smile. But before I could even sit down, the comments began. My son rolled his eyes. My daughter sighed loudly. My wife looked at me with disappointment. "Still jobless?" she asked once. Then laughter filled the room. It wasn't kind laughter. It was sharp. It cut deep. I stayed quiet. I thought silence was safer, but silence only gave them more reason to mock me. They called me lazy, said I wasted my life. They told me I was a burden, that I didn't deserve the comfort of the house I built. Each word landed heavy, one after another. I tried to explain that I was still searching for work, still trying. But no one listened. They had already made up their minds. At dinner, I sat at the edge of the table. The conversations carried on without me. They talked about their days, their plans, their friends. When I tried to join, the room fell silent for a moment. Then someone changed the topic. It was like I wasn't there at all. I felt invisible in the home I once owned. Sometimes, I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. The strong man who worked 2 jobs, who built a home with his own hands, now looked tired, small, forgotten. I remembered the times when my family looked at me with pride, when they thanked me for everything. Those days felt like they belonged to another life. My grandchildren laughed at me too. They copied their parents. "Grandpa's broke," one of them said once, giggling. I smiled to hide my pain, but inside, something cracked. It's one thing to be insulted by adults. It's another to hear it from children who learned it by watching others. I spent most days in my small corner of the house. I read old newspapers, drank tea, and kept quiet. When the bills came, my wife sighed loudly and said, "You're useless." When the rent was due, my son said, "We're doing everything while you sit here." They forgot the years I paid for everything. They forgot the sacrifices. They forgot my worth. Every time I turned on my phone, I looked for job openings. I sent applications, made calls, even went for interviews. But age wasn't kind. People wanted younger workers, faster workers, cheaper workers. I came home tired, with rejection written on my face. My family didn't care. They only saw failure. One evening, my daughter laughed as I tried to explain a small business idea. "You can't even manage your life," she said. "How will you manage money?" Everyone laughed again. I forced a smile, stood up quietly, and walked away. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain myself. I learned to live with their insults. I learned to eat in silence, to sleep early, to pretend it didn't matter. But it did. Each word left a mark. I prayed every night for a change, not for revenge, not for riches, just for peace. I wanted one day when no one called me a loser. I didn't know that day was coming soon. I didn't know that one small, random act would change everything. That the same people who laughed at me would soon be silent, their faces pale, their pride crushed. But for now, I sat quietly, listening to their laughter, holding my pain like a secret no one cared about. I had no idea that life was waiting with something huge, something that would make every insult echo back to them. I tried to talk to them many times. I wanted to explain that I wasn't lazy, that I was still trying to find my place again. But no one wanted to listen. My words were ignored the moment I started speaking. My son would look at his phone. My wife would shake her head. My daughter would sigh loudly, as if listening to me was a waste of time. Every attempt to defend myself ended in silence or laughter. I stopped expecting kindness. I realized that even when I spoke from my heart, they only heard what they wanted. They didn't care about my effort, my feelings, or my past sacrifices. They only saw my present struggle. They judged me for being old, for being tired, for not earning anymore. They forgot everything else. Each day felt longer than the last. I began to eat alone. At first, they invited me to the table, but my silence made them uncomfortable. Soon, they stopped asking. They ate together, laughed together, and left my plate on the counter. I ate cold food, standing by the sink. The warmth of family meals was gone. I was a stranger in my own home. At night, I sat in the living room while they watched TV. I tried to join their laughter, but it felt forced. The jokes didn't make sense to me anymore. I was part of the background, like a piece of furniture that no one noticed. When I spoke, they acted like I had interrupted something important. So I stopped talking altogether. The phone was my only companion. I scrolled through news, searched for small job postings, tried to find ways to earn a little money. Most of the time, there was nothing. Still, I checked every day. I told myself that something would come if I just stayed patient. But even patience hurt when no one believed in you. The nights were the hardest. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my younger days, when my family used to depend on me, when they came to me for advice. Back then, I felt needed. Now, I felt like an extra person taking up space. Sometimes I thought about leaving, but I had nowhere to go. My savings were gone, spent on their education, their comfort, their dreams. I had given them everything, and in return, I had become invisible. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and heard them talking. They didn't see me standing there. My son was laughing with his wife, saying, "Dad just sits around all day doing nothing." My daughter added, "He's probably reading job ads again like it matters." They laughed loudly. I froze where I stood, my hands shaking slightly. It wasn't just disrespect, it was cruelty. I turned around quietly and walked away before they noticed. I sat on my bed for hours, staring at the wall. Their words replayed in my head again and again. It didn't matter how strong I had been once. In their eyes, I was just a man who failed to keep up. A man who no longer mattered. I stopped sharing my thoughts after that. I stopped hoping they'd see my worth. The love I once had for my family was still there, but it was covered by disappointment. The home I built with pride now felt like a cage. Still, I stayed polite. I greeted them every morning. I kept the house clean when they were at work. I smiled when they ignored me. But inside, I was shrinking. Every day, a little more of me disappeared. I didn't realize then that life was quietly preparing something for me. That the same people who made me feel worthless would soon have to watch my name shine brighter than they ever imagined. But for now, all I had was silence, and a heart learning how to survive it. It happened one night after dinner. Everyone was in the living room, talking, laughing, and scrolling on their phones. I sat quietly in the corner, listening. I didn't say much anymore. I just wanted to be near them, even if they didn't want me there. But that night, something felt colder than usual. There was a kind of sharpness in their voices, a tone that made me feel smaller. My son started complaining about money again. Bills, expenses, payments, all things I used to handle without help. Now they blamed me for not being able to contribute. "You should have saved more when you were younger," my son said. My daughter added, "You always said you'd take care of us." "Look at you now." I lowered my head. I didn't argue. They went on for a while. The words grew meaner. My wife joined in, saying I was a burden, that she was tired of defending me to everyone. It wasn't the first time she said that, but this time it sounded final. I felt something inside me start to break, like a small crack that suddenly widened. Then my son said something that froze me. "You'll die broke." The words were cold, empty, and cruel. Before I could react, my daughter laughed and said, "We'll handle things when you're gone." The room filled with laughter, not happy laughter, but laughter that burns. I sat there, motionless. I didn't say a word. I just looked at them, my family, the people I had sacrificed everything for. In that moment, it was like looking at strangers. I remembered the nights I worked overtime, the days I skipped meals, the years I spent building a life for them. And now, those same people looked at me like I was useless. Something inside me went quiet. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, a kind of emptiness that comes when love turns into pain. I stood up slowly, walked to my room, and closed the door. No one followed. No one cared. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall. My eyes were dry. My heart felt heavy. The words, "You'll die broke," echoed in my head again and again. It didn't hurt because it was cruel. It hurt because I had once believed that family meant love, no matter what. But love, it seemed, had limits. That night, I couldn't sleep. I looked out the window at the street below. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside, everything had fallen apart. I thought about leaving the house, disappearing, starting over somewhere else. But I had no money, no friends left, no one to turn to. So I did what I always did. I stayed quiet. But this time, something was different. The silence felt heavier. It felt final. I realized that if I didn't change something soon, I would disappear completely, not by dying, but by being forgotten while still alive. I decided that from that night on, I wouldn't beg for respect anymore. I wouldn't ask them to listen. I wouldn't try to explain or justify my worth. If they wanted to call me a loser, I'd let them. I would let them believe it. Because one day, they'd see the truth on their own. Not through my words, but through life itself. I turned off the light and lay down. The darkness didn't scare me anymore. It felt honest. It felt like the only thing left that didn't lie. I closed my eyes and made a small promise to myself. I didn't know how or when, but I would find a way to reclaim my pride. Not to prove them wrong, but to remind myself that I wasn't what they said I was. That promise stayed with me, quiet, hidden, but alive. And it would soon become the reason everything changed. The next morning, I left the house earlier than usual. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just needed space, air, and silence. The walls inside my home felt too close, filled with voices that only hurt me. I walked down the street with slow steps, my hands in my pockets, my head down. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like going back. I stopped at a small store on the corner. The smell of fresh bread came from inside. The shopkeeper smiled at me, asked how I was. It was the first kind voice I had heard in days. I bought a piece of bread, a cup of coffee, and sat on the bench outside. The air was cold, but it felt cleaner than the air at home. As I sat there, watching cars pass and people move about their morning, I thought about my life. I thought about all the years I spent working, saving, giving. I thought about how easily people forget. The same hands that once gave food were now shaking from hunger and exhaustion. I wondered how love could vanish so quietly. I walked to the park next. It was empty except for a few children playing. Their laughter reminded me of when my own children were small. Back then, they ran to me every evening when I came home from work. They hugged me, showed me their school papers, asked me to buy sweets. Now those same children couldn't stand the sight of me. I sat on a bench near the pond, feeding a few pieces of bread to the birds. For a moment, I smiled. The birds didn't judge me. They didn't call me names. They just came, took what they needed, and flew away. I wished people were as simple. When my coffee cup was empty, I walked again. I didn't know where to go. My steps led me to a small convenience store. Inside, people were lined up buying groceries, snacks, and tickets. I didn't plan to buy anything. I just wanted to stay inside for a few minutes and warm my hands. Then, near the counter, I saw a bright poster. Lottery jackpot, $4 million. I looked at it and smiled weakly. I had seen it before, many times, but it always felt like something meant for other people. I never believed things like that could happen to me. Still, something in me whispered, why not? Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was just the need to feel like I could still make a choice for myself. I pulled out a few coins from my pocket, the last bit of change I had, and bought one ticket. The cashier handed it to me, smiling. "Good luck," she said. I nodded. I folded the ticket carefully and slipped it into my pocket. I didn't even check the numbers. I didn't dream about winning. It was just something to hold on to, something small that belonged to me alone. I walked out of the store feeling a little lighter. The sun was higher now, and the streets were louder. I looked around at the world, people rushing, cars honking, life moving fast, and I realized how far I had drifted from it all. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt quiet. Maybe quiet was enough. When I reached home, no one noticed I had been gone for hours. My family didn't ask where I went or how I was. They were too busy arguing about money and work. I slipped into my room quietly, took the ticket from my pocket, and placed it inside an old book. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even think about it again. That little piece of paper stayed there, forgotten, between old pages filled with dust and time. But it waited. And soon it would become the thing that turned my pain into power. The moment when the loser they laughed at would become the name they whispered in disbelief. A week passed without anything changing. The days looked the same. Quiet mornings, long afternoons, and cold dinners. I still woke up early, still looked for work online, still stayed invisible inside my own house. My family had stopped talking to me completely. They moved around me like I was furniture. I had learned not to care, or at least that's what I told myself. One morning, while cleaning my room, I found the old book where I had hidden the lottery ticket. It was dusty and bent at the edges. I picked it up and opened it slowly. The small paper slipped out and fell to the floor. For a moment, I didn't even remember what it was. Then I smiled slightly. The forgotten ticket. The one I bought without thinking. I sat down on the bed and looked at it. The numbers were still clear. I turned it over in my hands and wondered if it had expired. It had been more than a week. Maybe I should check it, I thought. Not because I expected anything, but because I had nothing else to do. I walked to the small store again. The same shopkeeper was there. She smiled when she saw me and said, "You brought your ticket?" I nodded. She took it and checked it under the small machine behind the counter. The sound it made was different this time. A loud beep. The shopkeeper froze for a second, then looked up at me with wide eyes. "Sir," she said softly, "you won." She handed the ticket back with a small piece of paper showing the numbers. "All of them match," she said. "You need to claim this. You're the winner." I stared at the ticket for a long moment. My hands started shaking. The numbers danced in front of my eyes. $4 million. It didn't feel real. I read the paper again, then once more. The numbers were the same every time. I didn't shout. I didn't jump. I just stood there, frozen, my mind blank. The shopkeeper called someone to confirm. They checked again. It was true. The old man, the one everyone ignored, the one my family called the biggest loser, had just won $4 million. I walked home slowly, holding the ticket carefully, like it was made of glass. Every step felt heavy. My heart beat faster, but my face stayed calm. When I reached home, no one noticed. My son was on the phone. My wife was watching TV. My daughter was scrolling through her tablet. I walked quietly to my room and closed the door. I sat on the bed and placed the ticket on the table. For a long time, I just stared at it. I thought about all the insults, all the laughter, all the times I was made to feel small. I remembered the nights when I couldn't sleep, the mornings when no one said good morning. And now, life had changed in one small moment. Quietly, without warning. I smiled a little, but it wasn't joy, it was relief. It was justice in the simplest form. I whispered softly to myself, "So this is what it feels like. Not revenge, not anger, just peace." For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't rush to tell anyone. I didn't plan to. I wanted to keep it to myself for now. I knew that the moment my family found out, they would change their tone. They would call me dad again, maybe even hero. But I didn't want their sudden love. I wanted quiet. That night, I ate alone, as always. But the food tasted different. Not because it was better, but because my heart felt lighter. I had no reason to prove myself anymore. I didn't need to explain. The same people who called me a loser would soon see my name in the paper. I didn't need to say a single word. I looked at the ticket one last time before going to bed. The small piece of paper that everyone would soon talk about. The proof that sometimes the world gives back what it takes, not out of pity, but out of fairness. I smiled faintly, turned off the light, and slept deeply for the first time in years. I sat in my room holding the ticket for a long time before deciding what to do next. I wasn't sure how to react. Part of me wanted to shout, to laugh, to finally tell them all that I was not a failure. But another part of me felt tired. The win didn't erase the pain they caused. It didn't erase the words they said. It only made me realize how quickly life could change when no one expected it. I called the lottery office the next morning. They confirmed my ticket was real and told me what steps to follow. I listened carefully, wrote everything down, and thanked them. When the call ended, I sat quietly again. $4 million. The number didn't even sound real to me. I had never seen that much money in my life. I went to the bank the next day, met with officials, and signed the documents. Everything happened slowly, but smoothly. Each signature felt like a door opening. When the final paper was stamped, the woman at the counter smiled and said, "Congratulations." I nodded politely. I didn't smile back. I still couldn't believe it. Walking out of the bank, I looked up at the sky. It was cloudy, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I didn't rush home. I didn't even tell anyone. I took a walk through the park instead, the same one where I used to feed birds and think about my failures. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt steady, calm, like the world had finally given me a small piece of what I deserved. I bought myself a cup of tea from a small stall. As I sipped it, I thought about how quiet my victory was. There were no cheers, no claps, no one waiting to hug me. But maybe that was better. I had spent my whole life giving, and this was the first time something came back to me, only for me. That evening, I came home as usual. My son didn't look up from his phone. My wife barely noticed me. My daughter was talking loudly about a new job offer. I sat at the table quietly, listening to them talk about their lives, their plans, their problems. I felt like an outsider again, but this time it didn't hurt. I smiled faintly to myself. If they thought I was still a loser, let them. I knew the truth now. The next few days passed normally for everyone but me. My family continued treating me the same way while I quietly planned my next steps. I didn't want to stay in that house anymore. It was filled with bitterness, not love. I wanted peace, not pity. I started making calls to banks, to lawyers, to real estate agents. I moved carefully, made sure no one knew. At night, I sat awake thinking about how different everything felt. The same people who once made me feel worthless would soon see my name on every TV screen, in every newspaper. Not as a loser, not as a burden, but as a winner, someone who succeeded when no one believed in him. I didn't want to hurt them, but I also didn't want to protect them anymore. They had already taken everything from me, my dignity, my pride, my peace. This win was mine, and I wasn't going to let their sudden interest ruin it. When the official announcement was scheduled, I didn't tell them. I let the world do it for me. I went to sleep early that night, calm and steady. I knew that by morning, everything would be different. I didn't dream about the money. I dreamed about silence, the kind where no one shouted, laughed, or insulted me. The next morning, the news would carry my name across the city. The man they ignored, mocked, and called the biggest loser was now the man on every screen. But I didn't stay home to see it. I had already packed my bag, ready to leave quietly before they even knew what happened. For once, I didn't need to see their faces to know what they'd look like. Shock, regret, shame. I had imagined it enough times to know. And this time, I didn't feel guilty about it. Not even a little. I woke up early the next morning, before anyone else in the house. The sky was still gray, and the streets were quiet. I sat at the table with a cup of tea, thinking. For the first time in years, I felt calm. The noise inside my head was gone. I had no anger left, only a simple plan. To start over, completely, and never look back. I took a piece of paper and began to write a list. It wasn't long, just a few things I needed. New clothes, a small apartment, and a lawyer to help manage the money. I didn't want to waste time or brag. I wanted to move smart, silent, and fast. The fewer people who knew, the better. I started by calling the lawyer who helped verify my winnings. The man sounded surprised to hear from me so soon, but he agreed to help with the next steps. We talked for a long time. I asked about setting up new accounts, different names, and safe investments. I wanted to make sure no one could reach my money, especially not my family. When I hung up, I felt lighter. For years, I had been the one who depended on others. Now, for the first time, others would depend on me without knowing it. But I wasn't going to give them that power again. I packed a small bag that afternoon, just clothes, my important papers, and the winning ticket. My family didn't notice. They were too busy arguing over bills and talking about their weekend plans. I looked at them from the doorway for a moment. The same people who called me a burden were sitting in the home I built, surrounded by things I once bought. I felt no hate, just distance. I walked out quietly and took a cab to the city. The driver made small talk, but I barely listened. My eyes stayed on the road ahead. The world outside looked new again, full of movement and life. I realized how small my world had become when I stayed trapped inside that house. By noon, I had met with the lawyer in person. We set up everything, new accounts, investments, and a plan for taxes. The lawyer asked if I wanted to make my family beneficiaries. I smiled politely and said, "No, not this time." Next, I found a small rental apartment near the park. It wasn't big, but it was quiet and clean. The owner didn't ask many questions. I paid for 6 months in advance and moved in that same day. I bought simple furniture, a few dishes, and food for the week. Everything I had now was mine, earned without anyone's help. I called the utility companies and transferred my name off the old house's bills. My family wouldn't even realize it until the next payment cycle. I didn't care what they'd think. They never cared when the same man they mocked was paying for everything. At night, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, looking at the city lights. I took out my phone, saw their names on my contact list, and felt nothing. No anger, no longing. I deleted every number one by one. It felt like cleaning a wound that had been open too long. I slept peacefully that night, something I hadn't done in years. No insults, no cold looks, no laughter at my expense. Just quiet. In the days that followed, I went for walks, bought books, and learned about managing my money. The lawyer helped me make safe investments so the money would last for life. I planned small donations to charities that helped old people like me, the ones forgotten by their families. I didn't need revenge. My plan was not to destroy anyone. My plan was simple, to build a life that didn't need their approval. Soon, the news would reveal my name and story. I didn't care how they'd react, but deep down, I knew it would shake them. I wasn't waiting for it. I was done waiting for anyone. I was living again, finally on my own terms. 3 days later, my quiet life changed again. The lottery office finally announced the winner publicly. They released my name, photo, and story to the media. My picture was everywhere, on newspapers, TV screens, and social media. "Local man wins $4 million jackpot," the headline said. Under it was my full name, smiling in front of the bank. The same name my family had mocked now filled every news channel. I didn't even know it was out until my phone began buzzing non-stop. Calls from unknown numbers, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some congratulated me. Some wanted help. Some just wanted to see if it was real. I didn't answer any of them. I turned the phone off, smiled faintly, and poured myself a cup of tea. Back at the old house, my family was having breakfast when the news came on. The television showed my face, clear and proud. For a few seconds, no one said a word. My son froze mid-bite. My wife dropped her spoon. My daughter stared at the screen with wide eyes. None of them could believe it. The man they had called the biggest loser had just become a millionaire. The reporter spoke about how the winner had lived a quiet life, how he had bought the ticket from a small store on the corner, how he had been humble and polite to everyone. They praised my patience and calmness. Every word made my family smaller in their own chairs. They remembered their laughter, their insults, their words, every cruel thing they ever said. My son stood up and ran to his phone. He dialed my number again and again. No answer. My wife tried too. My daughter sent messages, all unread. Panic replaced pride. The same people who had ignored me now wanted to find me, to talk to me, to share my moment. But I wasn't there anymore. I had moved on in every way possible. They searched online for clues. The article said I had been seen in the city with a lawyer. They realized I must have left for good. The shock turned to guilt. They remembered the last night they had spoken to me properly. The night they laughed while I sat quietly in the corner. That memory now burned inside them. The house felt heavy that day. No one spoke much. My son went to work late. My daughter stayed in her room. My wife sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen long after the news ended. The silence was loud. For the first time, they missed my presence. The sound of my footsteps, my voice calling out in the morning, my quiet company. They had pushed me away until there was nothing left to push. Meanwhile, I stayed in my small apartment, watching the same news report with calm eyes. I didn't smile, didn't cry. I just watched quietly, sipping my tea. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. I turned off the TV and looked out the window. The city lights felt warmer now. I had become free. Calls kept coming for days, some from reporters, some from relatives I hadn't seen in years. Even neighbors from my old area wanted to visit me. But I didn't open the door for anyone. I didn't want fame or attention. I wanted silence, something I had never had before. Back at my old home, my family finally understood what losing really meant. It wasn't about money. It was about losing someone's love, trust, and respect. They could buy food, clothes, and things, but not forgiveness. They had broken something they couldn't repair. For me, the news didn't change much. It only showed what I already knew, that sometimes life waits quietly to give people exactly what they deserve. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The world already knew my name. The morning after the news broke, my old phone began to buzz non-stop. Even though I had turned off most notifications, the missed calls kept stacking. 19 calls before noon. Some from my son, some from my wife, and others from numbers I didn't recognize. I looked at the screen once, then placed the phone face down on the table. I didn't need to answer. They had already said everything that mattered when they called me a loser. At the same time, back at the old house, the panic was spreading. My son called again and again, pacing across the living room, frustrated that every call went unanswered. My wife tried to send messages, long ones filled with excuses, short ones with crying emojis, even a few voice notes, all left unread. They didn't know where I lived now. They didn't know that the man they ignored had already built a new life far from theirs. My daughter tried a different approach. She posted online, writing, "So proud of my father, the lottery winner." It got hundreds of likes and comments. People congratulated her, not knowing she hadn't spoken to me in weeks. She smiled for the photos, pretending she had always been by my side. But deep down, she knew the truth. I hadn't answered her calls either. The guilt burned quietly under the surface. Meanwhile, I stayed in my small apartment, reading the newspaper calmly. My photo was on the front page again, with the same headline. I didn't feel pride or revenge. I felt distance, like watching someone else's life from far away. I made breakfast, ate slowly, and looked out the window. For the first time in years, I was free of their voices, their judgment, and their noise. The calls continued all day. By evening, my phone had more than 50 missed calls. Still, I didn't pick up. Every ring reminded me of the nights I had sat at the same table, begging them to listen, only to be laughed at. The sound of their laughter used to echo in my head. Now, their silence did. I preferred it that way. At home, they were falling apart. My son's voice shook as he left another voicemail. "Dad, please call back." We didn't mean it. We were wrong. My wife cried softly in the background. My daughter sent another message. "We miss you. Please come home." None of them said sorry, not clearly, not honestly. They only wanted what they had lost, access to me, to my money, to the comfort that came with my name. They tried to reach out through friends, neighbors, even the lawyer. But the lawyer followed my instructions carefully. "I can't share his information," he said firmly. My family began to realize that they no longer had control, not even a piece of my life. The man they once dismissed had vanished behind quiet success, leaving them to face the emptiness they created. At night, I checked the phone one last time. The screen was full of missed calls and messages. I scrolled through them slowly, reading each one without emotion. Some begged, some apologized, some were just confused. I deleted all of them without replying. I didn't need to say anything. Silence was my answer. I went to bed early, feeling peaceful. I knew they were awake somewhere, pacing, crying, regretting. But I didn't wish them harm. I only wished they had understood sooner that respect costs nothing, yet means everything. By the next morning, the world had already moved on to new stories. But my family couldn't. They kept calling for weeks, hoping I'd change my mind. I never did. The man they once called the biggest loser had become the one who didn't need them at all. I looked around my quiet apartment, small but full of peace, and smiled. The noise was gone. The insults were gone. The loneliness was gone too, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years: dignity. I didn't call it revenge. I called it peace. For the first time in my life, I felt free from the weight of people's judgment. The money wasn't the payback. The silence was. The space between me and those who once insulted me was worth more than the $4 million in my account. I woke up early each morning, made my own breakfast, and sat near the window watching the city move. There was no shouting, no mocking, no cold faces, just quiet. It felt strange at first, but then it felt right. I realized I had lived my whole life trying to please others, and now I was finally living for myself. When the lawyer called to update me on the investments, I listened carefully and thanked him. The money was growing safely, and I didn't have to worry about anything anymore. For years, I had been scared of not having enough. Now, I didn't need much at all. A small home, a warm meal, and peace. That was all I needed. I donated a small amount to the old shelter downtown. It helped old people who had been abandoned by their families. I visited once and saw faces like mine, quiet, tired, but still kind. I didn't tell them my story. I didn't need to. They already knew the feeling of being forgotten by the people they loved most. I helped them quietly, the way I wished someone had helped me. Back at my old home, my family's life kept falling apart. My son's business was struggling. My daughter's job wasn't stable. My wife had grown sick from stress and regret. They still called sometimes, still begged, but I never replied. They had made their choice long before the lottery win. Now, I had made mine. Sometimes I wondered what they talked about now. Maybe they argued about who was to blame. Maybe they sat in silence, thinking about how quickly things changed. Maybe they finally realized that a person's worth isn't measured by what they own, but by how they treat others when they have nothing. One day, a reporter came to my new building. She asked to interview me for a follow-up story. I agreed. She asked me many questions about the win, the money, and my plans. But at the end, she asked one that made me pause. "What do you want to do first with your winnings?" I thought for a moment, then smiled softly and said, "I just want to live without noise." It wasn't a clever answer. It was an honest one. The reporter smiled, wrote it down, and thanked me. That line became the title of the article the next day. My photo appeared again, this time with the words, "Man wins $4 million and chooses peace over luxury." My family saw that too. They read my words and knew exactly what I meant. It wasn't about money. It was about peace, something they could never give me. I didn't hide forever. Sometimes I visited the old neighborhood. I'd walk by the park, the store, the street where I once lived. I saw people who used to ignore me now waving and smiling. I smiled back politely but didn't stop. My past didn't hurt anymore, but I didn't want to stay in it either. At night, I sometimes sat by the window and looked at the stars. I thought about everything, the years of struggle, the words that broke me, the small ticket that changed everything. I wasn't angry anymore. Life had balanced itself. The ones who laughed at me learned what losing truly meant, and the man they mocked learned how strong, quiet hearts can be. I didn't plan to see my family again. I wished them peace from a distance, hoping they would learn to live without hate. My payback wasn't to hurt them. It was to live well. And that's exactly what I did. The man they once called the biggest loser became the man they could never forget. Not because of money, but because I proved that even broken people can win when they choose peace over pride.